Welcome to our deep dive today.
Oh, great.
We're exploring Mary Shelley's Frankenstein today, using excerpts from an academic introduction to the novel
Okay.
as our guide, and we'll be kind of tracing its origins, uncovering its key themes, and understanding why this story still resonates with us centuries after its creation.
You know, it's so intriguing how this iconic tale emerged from a casual, ghost story challenge among friends.
Oh, wow.
It really speaks to the power of imagination, which was a cornerstone of the Romantic movement that Shelley was a part of.
It makes you wonder if those friends had any idea that they were witnessing the birth of a literary masterpiece.
Right.
But you mentioned Romanticism. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how it influenced Shelley's work?
Yeah, Romanticism was a reaction against the Enlightenment's emphasis on pure logic and reason. It celebrated emotion, intuition, and the exploration of the human experience in all its complexity. And this focus on the inner world is really key to understanding Frankenstein.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather the monster in the lab.
Right.
Many people mistakenly believe that the creature is named Frankenstein.
Yes.
Can we clear that up?
Absolutely. It's a common misconception. The creature has no name, while Victor Frankenstein is the scientist who created him.
Okay.
To avoid confusion, we'll refer to the scientist as Victor,
Okay.
and the creature simply as Frankenstein.
That makes sense. Now, Shelley describes Frankenstein as a phantasm of a man, highlighting how our perceptions, especially first impressions and memories,
Right.
could be unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
What strikes me is how this connects to the way Aristotle talked about how our minds fill in gaps in information.
That's a great observation. Aristotle used the terms enthymeme and syllogism to describe this process. An enthymeme is a kind of logical argument where a premise is left unstated, and a syllogism is a structured argument with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Both demonstrate how we use existing knowledge and assumptions to make sense of new information, often unconsciously. Just like we might assume the creature is named Frankenstein because of its association with Victor, our minds are constantly creating narratives even when the full picture isn't clear.
So in a way, we are all creating our own Frankensteins by filling in the blanks with our assumptions.
Yeah.
This idea of Victor and his creation representing a clash between opposing forces is really intriguing.
Absolutely. It's a classic binary opposition. Victor represents humanity's scientific ambition and the pursuit of knowledge. Frankenstein, on the other hand, embodies the potential for hubris, the unintended consequences of that ambition, and the creature that emerges when we overstep our bounds. It's not a coincidence that Shelley considered the modern Prometheus as a title for the novel.
Now that you mentioned Prometheus, can you tell us more about that myth and how it relates to Frankenstein? I remember it had something to do with fire, right?
Yes, in Greek mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Fire symbolizes progress, but it also has the potential for destruction. Prometheus was severely punished for his actions, much like Victor faces devastating consequences for creating Frankenstein.
That parallel is fascinating. It's like Shelley is warning us about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the need to consider the potential consequences of our actions.
Exactly. It's a theme that resonates throughout the novel, particularly in the complex relationship between Victor and Frankenstein. It's not just a simple case of creator and creation, but a tangled web of love, hate, fear, and responsibility.
That complexity really makes you think it's not just about a scientist and a monster. It's about the very nature of creation and the ethical dilemmas we face when we attempt to control the natural world. What's interesting is that we see similar dynamics play out in other stories, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and even in the Hulk's relationship with Bruce Banner.
Those are excellent comparisons. Both explore the duality of human nature, the internal struggle between our desires and our fears, and the consequences of tampering with forces we don't fully understand. Just like Victor and Jekyll, Banner represents the archetype of the brilliant but somewhat repressed scientist who creates something monstrous within himself.
And in all three stories, there's this recurring element of isolation. Wouldn't you say? Victor Frankenstein, Jekyll Hyde Banner, and the Hulk, they all grapple with feeling like outsiders struggling to connect with the world around them.
That's a very astute observation. This theme of isolation is a key one in Frankenstein and its literary descendants. It speaks to the profound sense of alienation that can come with knowledge power, and the burden of carrying secrets that others can't comprehend.
So it's not just about physical isolation, but a deeper emotional isolation that arises from their experiences and the choices they make. Speaking of choices, Victor grapples with the limitations of language believing writing to be inadequate for expressing the full depth of his feelings. It's interesting because, of course, Mary Shelley uses writing as a powerful tool to give voice to those very feelings in her novel.
That's a wonderful paradox. It highlights the power of literature to explore the complexities of human emotion, even when the characters themselves might struggle to articulate those emotions directly. Shelley doesn't shy away from addressing other societal issues either, even subtly.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, in the story, Victor tells us about his friend who steps aside when he learns the woman he loves is devoted to another. This highlights the idea of choosing love over social pressure, which was a radical concept at the time. It's believed to be a nod to Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, a prominent feminist writer who advocated for love-based marriages in a society where marriage was often driven by economic and social considerations.
It's amazing how these small details can reveal so much about the author's perspective and the social context of the time. It's like peeling back layers of meaning to uncover a deeper understanding of the story. Now, before we move on, there's one more connection I wanted to explore.
What's that?
Well, we've been talking about Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but there's another iconic character who embodies this theme of the scientist creating a monstrous alter ego.
Ah, yes. The Hulk, co-created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, was directly inspired by both Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like Victor and Jekyll, Bruce Banner embodies that archetype of the physically unimposing, intellectually gifted scientist who unleashes a monstrous transformation within himself.
And there are some interesting parallels in their origins, too. The Hulk's initial form was actually gray, and he was primarily a nocturnal creature, much like Mr. Hyde.
And what's fascinating is that unlike the popular conception, the Hulk's transformations weren't originally triggered by anger. It was only later that he evolved into the green rage monster we're familiar with today.
So initially, he was more of a hidden, repressed aspect of Banner's personality emerging under specific circumstances rather than a direct result of rage. This evolution of the Hulk, especially with the introduction of Professor Hulk, who represents a merged identity of Banner, and the Hulk loads is like a whole other level of complexity.
It's almost like a commentary on the idea of multiple personality disorder with Banner and the Hulk representing different facets of a single personality.
Which begs the question, is it truly possible to separate our different selves, or are we all ultimately composed of these competing forces, light and dark, reason and instinct?
That's a question worth pondering, and it leads us back to the central theme of Frankenstein. What does it mean to be human, and what happens when we try to transcend our limitations?
That's a great point. We'll continue exploring these fascinating connections and delve deeper into the themes of Frankenstein in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into Frankenstein.
It's fascinating how these stories, created centuries apart, continue to resonate with our deepest fears and anxieties.
Yeah, it's almost as if the more we learn about science and technology, the more relevant these themes become.
Exactly. Take the rapid advancements we're seeing today in fields like genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. They hold incredible promise, but also raise ethical questions that echo the warnings of Frankenstein.
It seems like we're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but sometimes without fully considering the potential consequences.
That's where the cautionary aspect of these stories comes in. They remind us that knowledge and power in the wrong hands can be incredibly dangerous. Victor's downfall wasn't simply creating Frankenstein. It was his inability to take responsibility for this creation. His fear of the consequences that ultimately led to tragedy.
Right. That's a really important point. The theme of responsibility runs throughout all of these stories. Whether it's Victor abandoning his creation, Jekyll succumbing to his dark side, or Banner struggling to control the Hulk, there's this constant tension between our actions and the consequences that follow.
And this tension is heightened by the isolation these characters experience. They're burdened with knowledge and abilities that set them apart, making it difficult to form genuine connections and seek help when they need it most.
It's like their brilliance becomes a curse, trapping them in a cycle of fear and secrecy.
And that fear often leads to further isolation, creating a vicious cycle. They become so consumed by their internal struggles that they lose sight of the bigger picture, the potential impact their actions have on others. Which brings us back to that key question, what does it mean to be a monster?
Right. Is it purely about physical appearance, or is it something more profound, a reflection of our internal darkness? Frankenstein, despite his grotesque exterior, shows moments of compassion and a longing for connection. He's capable of both great cruelty and surprising tenderness.
And the Hulk, often portrayed as a mindless rage monster, also exhibits moments of heroism and self-sacrifice. It's this complexity, this blurring of the lines between good and evil that makes these characters so compelling.
They challenge us to look beyond simple labels and consider the multifaceted nature of both humanity and monstrosity.
And they force us to confront our own fears and desires. What aspects of ourselves do we try to repress or control? And what happens when those repressed impulses break free?
It's like these stories offer a safe space to explore those dark corners of the human psyche, to confront the monsters both within and without.
And in doing so, they provide valuable insights into our own capacity for both creation and destruction.
These stories almost act as a mirror, reflecting back our anxieties and aspirations.
And that reflection can be both unsettling and illuminating. It forces us to ask ourselves, what kind of monsters are we capable of creating, and what responsibility do we have to control the forces we unleash?
Those are heavy questions, but incredibly important ones to grapple with.
Absolutely. And the fact that these stories continue to be relevant centuries after their creation suggests that we haven't yet found satisfactory answers.
So if Frankenstein is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the unintended consequences of scientific progress,
then what does the enduring popularity of the Hulk tell us about our own fascination with power and control?
the Hulk represents this primal, almost uncontrollable force within us. Is it a fear we need to conquer or a part of ourselves we need to learn to accept and harness?
Perhaps it's both. Maybe the key is to find a balance to acknowledge the potential for both darkness and light within ourselves.
It's like we're constantly wrestling with these dualities, the rational and the irrational, the controlled and uncontrolled.
And the outcome of that struggle is never certain. It depends on the choices we make, the responsibility we take for our actions.
It's a powerful message that resonates across generations, and it leaves us with so much to think about long after the story is over.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want you to consider this. What other modern-day Frankensteins do you see in our world today? What creations born from our own ambition and ingenuity have the potential to become both our greatest triumphs and our greatest threats?
Those are some thought-provoking questions. We'll tackle those and more when we return for the final part of our deep dive into the enduring legacy of Frankenstein. Welcome back to our deep dive into Frankenstein. It's amazing how a novel written centuries ago can still spark such vital conversations today.
It really speaks to Mary Shelley's genius, but also to the timeless nature of the themes that she explores: ethics, responsibility, what it means to be human. These questions never really go away, do they?
And they seem especially relevant now, wouldn't you say? Think about it. Frankenstein was written during the Industrial Revolution, a time of unprecedented technological advancement.
Precisely. It was a period much like our own, with groundbreaking discoveries and anxieties about what those discoveries might unleash today. With AI biotech, the possibilities are even more mind-boggling.
Yeah, like that classic question. Just because we can do something, does it automatically mean we should?
That's the heart of it. The ethical considerations can't be an afterthought. Frankenstein reminds us that even the most brilliant intentions can go awry. Victor wanted to conquer death, to understand the secrets of life, but his creation became his undoing.
It's that cautionary tale that still has so much power. We might not be stitching together body parts in a lab, but we're manipulating genes, writing code that learns on its own. The potential for unintended consequences is huge.
And that's where the parallel to playing God comes in, right? Victor's story warns us against hubris, against assuming we can control forces we don't fully comprehend.
It's almost like a technological version of the law of unintended consequences. We make one change aiming for good, and a cascade of unforeseen effects follows.
A great analogy. We need humility, foresight, a sense of awe even. The power we now wield is incredible, and forgetting that is where the danger lies. But Frankenstein isn't just about the science itself.
Right, that's what's so brilliant about it. The novel also forces us to confront our values, how we use the knowledge we gain.
Exactly. Progress can't just be about technological leaps. It needs to be social and ethical progress, too. Who benefits from these advancements? What safeguards are in place? Are we using this power to uplift humanity, or just a select few?
So it's not enough to ask, can we do this? We also need to be asking, what kind of world are we creating in the process?
And that, I think, is the true legacy of Frankenstein. It pushes us to confront those fundamental questions about who we are, where we're headed, and what kind of future we want to build.
As we reach the end of our deep dive, what's the single most important thing you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
It's this. In a sense, we are all modern-day victors. We live in a world where each of us has the power to create, to innovate, to potentially disrupt. But that power comes with immense responsibility.
So it's up to us to use that power wisely, ethically, with a deep understanding of the potential ripple effects of our actions.
And to never forget the human element at the heart of it all. The pursuit of knowledge of progress should never come at the cost of our empathy, our compassion, our very humanity.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Frankenstein. We hope it sparked some new ideas and questions for you to ponder.
And as always, keep exploring, keep learning, keep challenging your own assumptions. Until next time, it's...